Hello, this is Mr. Mitchell with another video about the Declaration of Independence. The first video was about the introduction. The second video is about the preamble. Now, this is not history class, but we're looking more at some of the literary aspects of the Declaration of Independence. Now, the Declaration of Independence preamble is concise. That means it's free of useless wording. In fact, it's only 202 words. And in those 202 words, it explains what political philosophers probably took thousands of words to describe in the years before this. You would be hard-pressed to find useless words in here. You would also be hard-pressed to find any evidence of creative writing. This is not a creative document. This was a straightforward document getting to the point. You're not going to see alliterations and similes and metaphors very often in documents like this. This is as straightforward as it gets. Why would that be important in a Declaration of Independence? I'll let you write that on your study sheet why you think it would be. But anyway, the preamble states 4 ideas, and these ideas are sequential, that means in order, and it's meant to be logical. Jefferson, who wrote this, is playing on the logic of the people who read it. He thinks if he can make this logical, that it would make sense to everybody that the British government should not be in control of the colonies. But here are the ideas that you'll see in the preamble. Number 1, all men are created equal. Number 2, all have the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Number 3, governments are instituted to secure these rights. And number 4, when any form of government fails to secure these rights, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish the government. So Jefferson is playing upon the logic that people have. Now, while men are mentioned here, the word mankind was used in the introduction. That leads me to believe that Jefferson wasn't necessarily having a distinction between men and women in the Declaration of Independence. However, it is true that women did not have the same rights as men in 1776. In fact, it would be about 145 years later before women would get the right to vote. So there may be a certain ignorance of women here in the Declaration of Independence. But anyway, let's take a look at the preamble. Some of these are very commonly known words now. I'll read the first sentence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, endowed by God, with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So this is a famous first line. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Famous first line of this preamble. The truths that they're talking about, that Jefferson is talking about, is what was seen in the introduction. It was seen in the introduction that there comes a time when political separation is necessary. The word self-evident means obvious. So Jefferson is saying, well, it's obvious that there's a time when two groups must separate. Look at the next phrase, that all men are created equal. We mentioned how this does or does not apply to women. But there are other people that did not have these rights in the birth of this country. Many have pointed out that this country was formed after the Declaration, and it did not have equal rights for all citizens, only for white men. And slavery existed for 80 years after the Declaration of Independence. So, do they really mean are all men created equal, or was just this lip service for the Declaration of Independence? Or did the founders find that it was easy to write a Declaration of Independence and harder to actually put these principles into practice? Nevertheless, this statement leads to the logic that God grants the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what they mean by the Creator, their Creator. They're meaning God here. That these are rights that God gave us. God gave us the rights to life, gave us the life to liberty, gave us the right to the pursuit of happiness. Do we have these rights today in America? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? There are some infringements upon that, of course. For example, if it made me happy to go rob a bank, I don't have the right to go do that. So there are some restrictions to that hopefully would make sense in our laws. Notice that it says that the governments are instituted by men that derive their powers from the consent of the governed. In this sentence here, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is the principle of government by the people, not government by a king. So Jefferson is pointing out here that, hey, this is a king that is ruling us. And everybody knows that the right to govern comes from the consent of the people. And the people of the colonies did not give the king consent to govern them. So the main idea of the preamble and the introduction has been that people have the right to govern themselves and be separate from another government if it oversteps its bounds. Now, the purpose of the Declaration of Independence wasn't political philosophy. The purpose was that the American colonies should be free from British rule, but that has only been a minor point. Do you think it was a good idea to start out with the political philosophy like this and to then bring in the American colonies versus the British rule? Well, that's what did happen here. Now, this was not a new idea, this consent of the governed. This was something that had been written about years before, from John Locke to Voltaire to Thomas Paine to people you might hear in your history class. This was not a new idea created by the Americans. This was an idea that had been around so much that probably most people agreed with it. That it's the consent of the governed, not just some king getting his way throughout history. That's the consent of the governed. So this was a theory that people knew and most subscribed to it. So that was probably good that he started with that, so people would be in agreement right off the bat, and then he would get in the other stuff. So let's take a look at what the rest of it says, that whenever a form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government. And that's exactly what the colonies wanted to do. They're saying that Britain was destructive, that their government did not preserve their rights, and they have the right to alter or abolish it, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that the governments long established should not be changed for the light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evil are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms of which they are accustomed. We'll read the rest of it here in just a little bit. Like with the introduction, all that has been said is something that most readers would support. It's kind of a backdoor argument, you might say. If all men have these rights, well, Americans should have these rights also. Did you notice how often the word "that" is used in here? That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights. It's over and over, that this happened, that happened. Now, normally, that's not a very good way to write, but I think it's very effective here. It's very repetitive. That this is a reason, that this is a reason, that this is a reason. It all kinds of builds upon itself because they are using the word that quite frequently. It was not until the second half of the preamble that Jefferson diverts the reader's attention to Britain. He starts by using strong words and phrases like long train of abuses. See, where is that in here? Long train of abuses and usurpations. This is where he starts using words like despotism. And he hasn't even mentioned Britain yet until he gets down here, but he's going to throw a lot of words out that really are bad things, to have tyranny and despotism and a long train of abuses. But notice, whenever he talks about the colonies, the patient suffrage of the colonies. He's wanting to get people to see good things about the colonies. Oh, the colonies have suffered. They've been so patient with this long train of despotism and tyranny and so on. And he reminds people that it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. Now, I know I haven't read the final part, but I don't want to make this video too long. So I know we have some vocabulary and some questions for you to answer. Hope you learned a little about the preamble.